He locked me in with the same hands I once fed. The sound was small, metallic, final. For a moment I thought it was just the old door swelling again from the rain. But when I reached for the knob and felt the resistance, something deeper pressed into my chest. My name is Helen, 52 years old, a widow who raised one son in this narrow house where every wall still remembers laughter. The mornings once smelled of toast and coffee, sunlight spilling across the table where his school books lay open. It used to be enough, just him and me, surviving the quiet after my husband's death. Now, the quiet feels staged. I called his name once, then again. No answer. The light through the curtains wavered, dust floating like unspoken things. I touched the knob again, and my fingers met cold steel. "Tom?" I called. The word felt fragile, like it might shatter if it met the truth. He'd told me the night before that he was worried about me, said I was forgetting things, leaving doors open, stove on. But I remembered the look in his eyes, somewhere between pity and calculation. "It's for your safety," he'd whispered. Those words, at the time, felt like care. Now they tasted like control. The scent of his cologne still lingered, a sharp chemical trace that clung to the air. It was new, too expensive for him, too bold for comfort. I pressed my ear against the door. His footsteps moved away, slow, deliberate. I heard drawers open, something slide shut, the faint hum of his phone vibrating on a hard surface. I sat down on the bed, the same bed where I used to fold his laundry, and stared at the mirror across the room. My reflection looked smaller than I remembered, folded in on itself. "He's just worried," I told the reflection. But the reflection didn't answer. A vow took shape then, not loud, not cinematic, but steady. I would find out what he was hiding, not through shouting, not through pleading, but by staying calm, watching, remembering. Every sound, every scent, every word. I'd survived worse than locks. Time passed differently inside that room. The clock on the dresser ticked, indifferent. My stomach tightened. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I found a handwritten note tucked beneath the lamp. His handwriting, hurried and strange. It read, "Rest. Don't try the door. I'll explain everything soon." The soon struck me hardest. Soon was the word of someone who planned for delay, not comfort. I stood, pressed my hand flat against the wood. "You don't have to do this," I said softly. Silence answered. Silence always does. Hours later, the smell of reheated soup seeped under the door. He'd left a tray outside. When I pushed it in, there was another note taped to the bowl. "Love you, Mom. Sleep well. Love you." The phrase that used to warm me now felt rehearsed. I paced the floor, counting steps. 7 from door to window, 4 to the dresser, 2 to the bed. I traced the pattern until it became a map of small defiance. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th circuit, I noticed something glinting under the rug near the dresser. I knelt. It was a key, old, tarnished, too small for the main door but heavy enough to mean something. Maybe for the wardrobe, maybe for the drawer, maybe for the truth. Outside, his car engine started. The vibration reached through the floorboards, humming through my bones. I waited until it faded down the street, then pulled the rug back further. Nothing else. Just dust and the smell of old wood. Still, I held the key like it was hope made metal. I turned to the mirror again. My reflection watched me, eyes hollow but awake. "He thinks I'm broken," I whispered. "He's wrong." Night crawled in, shadows stretching along the walls like dark intentions. I tried the door one last time, whispering the small prayer of habit, not faith. It didn't move. The latch didn't tremble. The house sighed. I remembered when his father used to fix that very lock, the night before the storm that took him. I remembered my son, 12 years old, watching from the hallway, learning how to turn a screw with careful precision. He'd inherited that precision, used it now against me. I sat back on the bed, heart steady. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to listen to every creak, every pause, every lie. Because the truth is louder when someone tries to silence it. The clock struck 11. Somewhere outside, a dog barked once and stopped. I slipped the small key under my pillow, a secret waiting to be discovered. When he returned, I'd be ready. And when I checked his coat the next morning, the key I expected to find there, the one that fit the lock, was missing from his pocket. Every creak sounded like a warning. The house had a language of its own, wood expanding, pipes sighing, but now every sound carried intent. I pressed my ear to the cold wall and felt his footsteps above, steady and rhythmic, like he was pacing the ceiling instead of the floor. It was day 3, maybe 4. Time no longer held edges. Meals came through the door with no words attached. A tray slid in, a tray slid out. Silence replaced conversation. At first, I convinced myself he was worried. He'd said, "You just need rest, Mom. You've been anxious lately." The word anxious hung in the air long after he'd gone. I wasn't anxious. I was alert. There's a difference between fear and awareness. Fear freezes you. Awareness keeps you alive. When night fell, the house spoke again. A floorboard groaned beneath the dresser, sharper than the others. I crouched, pressing my palm to the wood, feeling a faint vibration. My heart raced. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was something he didn't want me to see. I pulled at the edge of the rug until it folded back. The floorboard had a thin line of dust disturbed near one corner. I dug my fingers beneath it and lifted. Beneath the plank was an envelope, thick, folded, sealed. My name written in his handwriting, stiff, practiced. I tore it open. Inside were copies of bank slips. The scent of old paper and dust rose up, faint, but sharp enough to make me cough. I laid them out on the bed, one by one. The same bank, the same account. But the signatures, my own, or something pretending to be. The amounts were neat and deliberate. $5,000, $3,000, $2,000, and $2,000 again. The total was $12,000. I counted twice. The ink looked too fresh. "He's using my name," I whispered. "He's using me." My chest felt tight. All those months he'd been telling me not to worry about bills, that he'd taken care of everything. He'd smiled when I thanked him. "Family helps family," he'd said. I hadn't realized he was helping himself. I sat back, staring at the papers. There was a reference in the corner of each page, simple strings of letters and numbers, the kind that mark a transaction. Reference F1299A, F1299B, F1221C. Real proof, silent and undeniable. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to wake the neighborhood. But instead, I folded them gently, slipped them back into the envelope, and hid it beneath the mattress. He'd never know I knew. Not yet. Hours later, when he brought dinner, I caught his reflection in the small mirror across the room. His eyes didn't meet mine. He placed the tray down and said, "You're eating less. Don't make me worry more." I studied his voice, the calmness too measured. "You don't need to worry," I said. "Good," he replied. A pause, then softer. "You'll thank me for this one day." The lock clicked again, and his footsteps retreated. That night, the house seemed to shrink. I sat awake, counting each creak above me, each sigh of the walls. Somewhere between the second and third hour, I realized I could trace his movements by sound. The shuffle near the stairs, the pause outside my door, the metallic scrape of something being dragged across wood. A low hum came from the vent. Maybe the refrigerator, maybe his phone. I pressed my hand against the floor, feeling the faint echo of movement beneath it. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, patterned, a rhythm of secrecy. I found a pencil stub and wrote on the back of one receipt. "If something happens to me, the bank knows." It wasn't a plan. It was a promise to myself. In the quiet, I whispered, "I will find out why you're doing this." The air felt heavier. I caught the faint scent of something burning from the kitchen, toast or perhaps paper. My stomach turned. I imagined him holding the rest of the receipts, watching them curl and blacken. I looked around the room, the bed, the mirror, the worn rug. Symbols of my life now turned against me, like accomplices keeping secrets. A memory surfaced, him at 12, fixing a broken chair with his small hands. "If you tighten something too much," he'd said, "it cracks." Back then, he was just a boy trying to fix what his father couldn't. Now he was tightening everything, my freedom, my name, my worth, until it would all crack under his control. I lay down, keeping the envelope close to my chest. Above, the boards creaked again, but this time the sound was softer, like the house itself was whispering something back. Every creak sounded like a warning, and tonight I finally understood what it meant. The floor whispered another name. His voice was sweet, only when someone else listened. When it was just the two of us, words turned into weapons, shaped to sound like concern but aimed to control. The phone became my last link to the outside, and he knew it. I tried dialing my sister's number that morning. All I heard was static, thick, distorted, deliberate. "Hello? Can you hear me?" I asked into the crackling silence. Nothing but the faint hum of interference. I tapped the receiver, pressed it harder to my ear. Somewhere beneath the noise, I thought I heard her voice. Then it vanished, swallowed whole. The light above me flickered, a dull, low glow that cast more shadow than comfort. I turned it off, then on again. The same weak pulse. That was when I noticed the thin black wire running behind the dresser, something I'd never paid attention to before. My stomach twisted. He'd been inside this room, not just outside it. When he returned later, I watched his eyes as he set down the tray. "The phone's acting strange," I said. He didn't look up. "Old wiring," he said. "You shouldn't use it. I'll handle it." "You'll handle it," I repeated softly. "Like the door?" His hand paused for a moment before he forced a smile. "You're overthinking again, Mom. You just need rest." I didn't answer. My silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. After he left, I waited an hour, maybe two, then dragged the dresser forward inch by inch. Dust bloomed into the air. The wire wasn't plugged into the wall at all. It split midway, reconnected with new tape, fresh, black, precise. He'd rewired the phone. My only line of truth now looped through his control. The next day, I slipped a note beneath the tray when he came, just a single line. "Call, repair service." He didn't respond. But by evening, a man showed up, thin, in a blue jacket with a logo I didn't recognize. "Telecom maintenance," he said, glancing around nervously. "Your son said I could check the line." He moved quickly, inspecting the junction box. I caught his hesitation when he peeled back the tape on the cable. He leaned closer to me, whispering, "This isn't our work. Someone's been rerouting calls from inside." The light from the window framed his face, half truth, half fear. "If you can, document it," he murmured. "Reference 71DX. That's the junction ID." He left just as fast, muttering that he didn't want trouble. After he left, I sat in the dim room, heart pounding. Reference 71DX. Proof that the line wasn't broken. It was manipulated. When my son came home that night, I tried once more. "Tom," I said quietly, "a technician came by." He froze mid-step. "Without my permission?" He said something's wrong with the line. His tone hardened. "You let a stranger in here?" The room chilled. "He just checked the cable." He stared at me long enough for silence to become its own kind of threat. "You don't trust me," he said. "I'm trying," I replied, my voice trembling but steady. "But every time I do, something else disappears." He turned off the light. The room dropped into darkness. "You should stop imagining things," he whispered. "You're confusing reality again." I wanted to scream. Instead, I listened. His footsteps retreated down the hall, the faint buzz of a call starting somewhere beyond my wall. I knew then he was talking to someone, about me. The muffled rhythm of his voice rose and fell, low, deliberate, and sweet. I pressed the receiver again that night. Static answered. But this time, beneath the hiss, I caught something. My own name. A woman's voice. My sister, faint but certain, asking, "Why are you telling me she's not well?" He'd been calling her, pretending to be my caretaker, my victim's advocate, my liar. The light flickered again. My hands shook, but not from fear, from fury contained too long. I took the receiver and traced the cord until it vanished into the wall, the same wall that kept me in. I whispered into the dark, "You can silence the call, but not the truth." Outside, dawn was trying to crawl in through the curtains, but its light couldn't reach me. I followed the wire down to where it split, jagged and half buried under the baseboard. He cut the wire before dawn. Even the walls kept accounts of his lies. The house wasn't silent anymore. It listened. Every breath, every whisper, every secret seemed stored in its corners. That morning, I was dusting the photo of my late husband, the one my son refused to take down but never looked at. When I lifted the frame, I noticed it was heavier than it should have been. Something shifted inside. I turned it over. The back was sealed with old tape, yellowed and curling. My fingers trembled as I peeled it away. Beneath the cardboard, tucked flat against the wood, was a small ledger, thin, hand-stitched, edges worn smooth by time. I opened it, expecting memories. What I found was arithmetic. The first line, transfer, $3,500. The second, cash withdrawal, $2,000. The third, deposit, $1,800. The last, wire, $700. Each entry neat, deliberate, signed in his handwriting, my son's. 4 transactions totaling $8,000, an amount too exact to be accident. The paper felt rough against my fingertips, as if it wanted to resist the truth. I traced the ink, the pressure of his pen strokes. There was a small reference at the bottom. Account entry 45AL. A hidden account, one I'd never seen in my statements. He'd kept a second ledger, his real one, behind a photograph meant to honor his father. The irony cut deep. My husband's eyes stared out from the photo, steady and kind. I whispered, "You'd never believe what he's done." The air grew heavy, still. Betrayal has its own texture. It clings to the skin. I closed the book, then opened it again, hoping the numbers might rearrange themselves, that there'd been a mistake. But the handwriting was unmistakable. His loops, his slant, his name. When he came home that evening, I placed the frame back exactly as it was. I didn't say a word. Dinner passed in quiet exchanges, spoons scraping, water pouring, silence stretching between us like wire ready to snap. "Why were you in the living room today?" he asked suddenly. "I was cleaning," I said, keeping my tone even. He nodded, eyes steady on his plate. "That's good. I'll handle the heavy things next time." He meant it as command, not care. I smiled faintly, the kind that hides more than it shows. After he went to bed, I took the ledger to my room and copied the numbers onto a separate sheet. I hid it inside a drawer beneath old receipts. If anything happened to me, someone would find it. Reference 45AL would mean something then. The next morning, I called the bank using the small phone he hadn't yet tampered with in the hallway. The woman on the line hesitated when I read the reference aloud. "That's a restricted account, ma'am. I'll need the authorized signer's consent to access it." "And who's the signer?" She paused, her voice softening. "A Thomas Hale." My throat tightened. "And when was it opened?" 3 months ago. 3 months ago, the same week he'd convinced me to let him manage the mortgage. My pulse quickened. The stakes had changed. This wasn't just about stolen money, it was about the house, the last thing my husband left me. I ended the call, heart pounding, the ledger pressed tight in my lap. The paper left faint indentations on my skin, like guilt transferring from ink to flesh. Later that day, I visited a retired legal clerk I'd once known through church, A quiet man, dependable. I told him I needed guidance, nothing formal, just understanding. I showed him the copied sheet. He adjusted his glasses and said, "If these are legitimate transfers and your name's on the property, he can't mortgage it without consent. You still hold rights." Then why would the bank let him? Because he probably forged it. The words fell like stones. I left his house with the paper tucked into my sleeve, my mind already moving faster than my fear. At home, the picture frame still hung perfectly straight. The same smile, the same stare, but the glass seemed to hold a new reflection. Mine, not as victim, but as witness. When the front door creaked open, I didn't flinch. His footsteps moved toward the living room. I stood still, the ledger hidden behind me. "Did you clean again?" he asked, voice too calm. I met his gaze. "Just a little dusting." He looked at the wall, then back at me. His eyes flicked once to the frame, and I knew. He knew I'd seen it. Without a word, he stepped forward, lifted the picture, and pulled out the now empty space behind it. The silence between us cracked. He entered the room holding the empty frame. He smiled when the nurse called me unstable. It was a small smile, meant for her, not for me. The kind of polite grin that makes deceit look like compassion. She sat across from me in the living room, clipboard balanced on her knees, the morning light cutting through the blinds in pale stripes. Her voice was soft, rehearsed. "Do you often forget things?" "Only the things I'm told to forget," I answered. She glanced up, startled, but quickly masked it with a professional nod. Behind her, he stood by the doorway, arms crossed, watching the performance unfold. The air was colder that day. The vent above the couch hissed faintly, carrying a draft that raised goosebumps along my arms. I folded my hands in my lap, steady, polite. I had no intention of letting them see fear. The nurse asked questions that had nothing to do with health. "Do you ever feel unsafe here?" Then glanced toward him before jotting something down. He nodded slightly, like a conductor cueing an orchestra. "She's been confused lately," he added, misplacing things, accusing people. "She's under a lot of stress," the nurse murmured. "I just want her to get help." His tone was warm enough to sound loving, firm enough to sound credible. I wanted to shout. Instead, I smiled. "Help is a lovely word, isn't it? Depends who defines it." She blinked, then checked another box. Her pen moved too quickly. The sound of scratching ink filled the silence like a saw against wood. I asked to see her notes. "It's just preliminary," she said. "Nothing to worry about." But when she left the room to take a call, she left her folder open for half a breath too long. I saw the first line. "Patient exhibits mild paranoia. Observation recommended." And beneath it, a signature already printed. His. My stomach dropped. The report was signed before she even arrived. By the time she returned, the air had turned sharp, the cold seeping into my bones. "Thank you for your time," she said. "We'll be in touch soon." He walked her to the door, his voice low but warm, the perfect caretaker. I caught one line as they left. "It's hard watching someone you love lose themselves." The door shut, and I felt the quiet press against me like a hand around my throat. I sat there for a while, staring at the prescription bottles she'd left behind. My name was printed neatly on the label. The dosage was small, harmless looking, but beneath the instructions was a second line, handwritten, "Begin immediately. Signed, Dr. M. Pearson, Evaluation Entry 12F." I turned the bottle in my hand. The plastic clicked softly, cold against my palm. I didn't open it. I didn't need pills to know what was happening. He was building a record, one paper at a time, to prove I couldn't be trusted. When he came back, he said, "You should take one before bed. It'll help you rest." "I'm not tired. You've been seeing things. I've been seeing the truth." He sighed, setting the bottle on the table between us. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder for who?" He looked at me for a long moment. "You don't understand what's good for you anymore." "I understand control when I feel it." For the first time, his expression faltered. "You think I'm the enemy," he said quietly. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" He hesitated, just long enough to expose the lie. Then he turned, muttering something about follow-up appointments. That night, I sat in bed, staring at the small chart she'd left on the side table. 4 categories, all checked. Each box a quiet accusation. The vent above the bed released another cold breath, brushing my skin like warning fingers. I opened the drawer beside me and placed the pill bottle inside, turning the label away. That was the moment I drew my line, not with anger, but with refusal. He knocked once before coming in. "Did you take it?" "No." He exhaled slowly. "You need to trust me." "I trusted you when you locked the door," I said. "I trusted you when you smiled for her." The silence between us fractured. He stepped closer, his shadow spilling across the wall. "Don't make me do this," he said. "Do what?" "Call the police." His words hung in the air, sharp as the cold crawling from the vent. I stared at him, unblinking. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "They'll need to hear both sides." The corner of his mouth twitched, somewhere between fury and disbelief. He turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. The house exhaled again, its chill wrapping around me like a verdict. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel trapped. I felt prepared. He threatened to call the police. Understood. All future script or narrative outputs will be delivered strictly inside a code block formatted in Markdown, exactly like this one. I filed the truth, and it disappeared. The day I walked into the precinct, the air felt heavier than the summer heat outside. The fan above the front desk spun lazily, pushing warm air in circles, doing nothing to ease the weight in my chest. I carried the report in both hands, careful not to bend it. Pages that held everything he'd done, every line of deceit I'd finally managed to name. The sergeant behind the counter didn't look up at first. He took my paperwork without reading, stamped the corner with a dull thud, and said, "We'll process it." His tone was mechanical, like he'd already decided not to. I stood there, waiting for a signature, a number, any sign of accountability. He finally met my eyes. "You'll get a copy once it's logged." "I brought one," I said, holding out the carbon duplicate. He glanced at it, then slid it back toward me. "Keep it safe. These things sometimes get misplaced." Misplaced. The word lingered like smoke. 3 days later, I returned. The same counter, the same indifference. The report had vanished. No record, no file number, no trace. "Probably lost in transfer," he said, avoiding my eyes. I pressed the copy against my palm, feeling the raised ridges of the carbon lines, each letter etched with quiet desperation. "It wasn't lost," I said. "It was buried." He sighed. "Ma'am, I don't make the rules." "Then who does?" He didn't answer. I walked out into the afternoon glare, the badge emblem on the glass door, glinting briefly before I pushed it open. The texture of that paper still pressed against my fingers. It had become my last proof, my last anchor. That evening, I met an old friend, someone who used to work internal admin at another station. He listened carefully, his jaw tightening as I spoke. "You said they lost it?" "Yes." "That's not loss," he said. "That's a quiet order. Someone pulled it." "Then how do I fight what I can't even see?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "File it again, somewhere else, but don't go through the same hands. I'll tell you which desk to ask for." His nameplate flashed briefly in the low light of the diner, an arbiter I could still trust, though even trust now came with fine print. That night, I copied everything again. 2 forms, same details, same reference number, incident report entry 91C. The paper was rough from overuse, the typewriter ink faint, but I pressed hard, making every word dig deeper into the sheet. Before dawn, I slipped the envelope into the post slot of a different precinct, the one he'd named. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from exhaustion, from knowing that truth in this town had to travel through back doors to be heard. 2 days passed, then 4. No call, no receipt. I returned to the second station, only to be told there was no record of a new report under my name. I looked at the officer behind the desk, younger, unreadable. "You're telling me 2 different precincts lost the same report?" He gave a small shrug. "Things happen. Systems fail. People fail," I corrected. He looked away, muttering, "You should probably talk to legal if it's that serious." I stepped outside into the cold. The city's hum felt distant, like the world had already decided to move on without me. But I hadn't come this far to let silence win. Back home, I laid the carbon copy flat on my desk. I traced the edges again, fingertips catching every indentation. It wasn't just paper. It was proof they'd seen, proof they'd chosen not to act. That night, as the house settled around me, I heard a soft rustle near the door. I thought it was the wind until I saw it, a manila envelope lying on the welcome mat. No name, no mark. I opened it slowly. Inside was my report, the same form, the same entry number. Only now it bore an official stamp, faded and unfamiliar. Someone had put it back. I ran my hand over the surface, the paper slightly rough from handling. The ink had smudged at the top where the word "received" was printed. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel invisible. Someone inside the system had seen me and slipped the truth back into my hands under cover of night. I stood in the doorway, the streetlights painting long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere, someone was still listening. The file reappeared on my doorstep. Even ink has a conscience. That's what the handwriting expert said as he leaned over the stack of papers, his glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose. The lamplight pooled across his desk, gold on white, every shadow a secret waiting to be read. He turned one of the envelopes toward me, tracing the signature with a steady finger. "Same strokes, same deception," he murmured. He didn't even bother to change the slant. I watched him circle a loop with his pen, deliberate, calm. The quiet hum of the fluorescent bulb filled the space between us, its faint flicker echoing the tremor in my chest. Proof. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was ink confessing under pressure. He glanced at me. "You said he filed these at the bank?" "Yes. 4 transfers, all under my name." He exhaled softly. "And they believed it?" "They believed him." He nodded, jotting notes in the margin of his report. His handwriting was neat, almost kind. Each stroke looked like an apology for the cruelty it described. "You'll need to attach this to a legal affidavit," he said, handing me the original sample. "Keep the chain of custody clean. No one can say you tampered." I folded the document carefully, sliding it back into the envelope. The paper felt heavier than its weight, like it knew what it carried. Outside, dusk had turned the city gray. The last traces of light clung to the window, catching the edge of the blinds before surrendering to night. I could still smell the faint tang of ink, metallic and honest. That scent stayed with me long after I left his office. At home, I spread the documents across the table. Every line of my supposed signature looked like a performance of me, as if my hand had been hijacked by someone who knew me too well. The M leaned left where it never had. The L curved upward with practiced precision. He hadn't forged it once. He'd rehearsed it. I whispered to myself, "Even ink remembers what the hand denies." A knock interrupted the thought. It was my ally, the same witness from before, standing at the door with her coat half-buttoned. "You got the report?" I nodded, showing her the envelope. She scanned the document quickly. "This is solid. He can't talk his way out of this." I wanted to believe her, but belief had become a fragile thing in my world. She set the papers down, her voice dropping. "If this goes to court, they'll question your stability again. You need to be ready." "I'm tired of being ready," I said. "I just want it to end." Her hand brushed my arm, a quiet gesture of loyalty. "Then end it right. Don't let him twist this one too." When she left, I sat in silence, the ticking of the kitchen clock marking each passing second. I took the pen he'd once gifted me from the drawer, its silver body scratched, the engraving nearly worn away. He'd said it was for signing important things. I stared at it, realizing it had been his tool all along. The light flickered once more, casting brief, trembling shadows across the papers. I turned one of the forged checks toward the lamp and watched how the ink caught the glow. Under the right angle, the original signature, mine, faintly bled through beneath the forgery, my real hand fighting to be seen. I gathered every sheet, slipped them into a clean envelope, and sealed it tight. On the flap, I wrote one line in my own handwriting: "Truth verifies itself." The next morning, I mailed the envelope to the district attorney's office. I didn't trust digital records anymore. Paper could burn, but at least you could feel it before it disappeared. Hours later, as the sun began to fall again, my phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number, just words. Stop digging. My hand went cold around the phone. For a long time, I just stared at the screen, the words pulsing faintly against the glass. I looked toward the window, where the light had died completely, and whispered to the dark, "Even ink has a conscience. Shame people don't." He sent me a message. Stop digging. He said I'd forgotten the meaning of family. The words echoed in the courtroom like a sermon twisted into accusation. He sat across the aisle, calm, well-dressed, the very image of a man wronged. His lawyer spoke for him, each sentence polished to sound like truth. I watched the file placed before the judge, the thin stack that claimed I was unfit, unstable, incapable of managing my own life, a counterclaim. He'd weaponized the word mother into something fragile. The gavel struck once, sharp and final, reverberating through the hollow chamber. That sound, clean, merciless, carried more weight than any slap I'd ever known. I had thought betrayal was private, something that rotted quietly behind closed doors. But here it was, printed on legal paper, stamped with the seal of family and law alike. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, sterile and cold. I could smell the polish on the wooden bench, the faint scent of dust mixing with metal. My palms pressed against the table until they trembled. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't about inheritance or protection anymore. It was about my sanity, my voice, my place in the world. When they asked for my response, I stood. "He says I've forgotten the meaning of family," I began. My voice didn't waver, though I felt it might. But family forgets nothing. It keeps every wound, every silence, every debt. It just pretends to forgive. A few people in the gallery shifted. The sound of papers rustling filled the pause between my words. His lawyer smirked. "Your Honor, my client simply wishes to protect his mother's well-being." I turned my gaze to him. "Protect me? By erasing me?" The judge raised a hand for quiet, but I kept speaking, softer now. "I raised a son, not an heir to deceit." He flinched, just slightly, but it was enough. The arbiter, my ally from the earlier filings, leaned forward, whispering under her breath, "Stay composed. Let the record work for you." Her tone was firm, protective. "We filed proof of the forged transfers, the expert testimony. Everything ties back. He can't outrun that." I nodded. I'd learned that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to survive the noise. The clerk began listing the exhibits: reference entry 52B, handwriting analysis entry 17F, and the financial proof logged last week. Each document a scar made visible. I imagined them like stepping stones across a flood, small but solid. When my turn came to testify, I looked directly at the judge. He told the police I was delusional. He told the bank I was confused, and now he tells the court I've lost myself. I paused. Maybe I did, for a time, but I didn't lose sight of what's mine. The courtroom went still. I heard the faint tap of a pen, the judge's fingers drumming against the armrest. A gavel rested beside her, its polished head catching a thin thread of light. He spoke next. "She's unstable," he said gently, too gently. "I've done nothing but care for her." "Care," I repeated, almost to myself. "By locking doors, by signing my name where I never signed, by deciding who I'm allowed to speak to." The judge shifted. "We'll hear the evidence before assigning credibility." "Then listen closely," I said. The arbiter rose beside me, placing the new file on the desk. The sound of it landing cut through the silence, thick, deliberate. Inside were certified copies of every forged transaction, every manipulated report. The ink still smelled faintly of solvent, fresh and raw. His attorney reached for it, but the judge stopped him with a gesture. "Counsel, the court will review first." For a moment he looked at me, not with anger, but disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom how the woman he'd silenced had found her way back into the light. The judge cleared her throat. "This proceeding will adjourn until the evidence is examined." But before she struck the gavel, the arbiter leaned toward her and spoke quietly. The judge nodded, then looked up. "Will also require access to the recordings," she said. The words froze him. His composure cracked for the first time. He whispered something I couldn't hear, and the sound of it, whatever it was, felt like a tremor under the bench. I knew then that his control had begun to unravel. The gavel came down one final time, echoing through the chamber, each strike a reminder that truth, once spoken, demands to be heard. The judge requested the recordings. Truth sometimes hides where fear dares not look. It was nearly midnight when I opened the drawer. The air in the room was still, except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan above me. My fingers brushed against cold metal, a small recorder wedged behind old receipts and paper clips. Its tiny red light blinked once, then again, steady, rhythmic, alive. For a moment, I just stared at it. My heart thudded against my ribs like a warning I was already too late to heed. I pressed play. His voice filled the silence, calm, confident. "She thinks she's winning," he said, "but she signs whatever I tell her to. Compliance by habit." The room tilted. Every word seemed to echo off the walls, ricocheting back into me. His laughter, soft, smug, cut through the quiet like glass. I had heard that tone before, in real life, wrapped in charm. But here, stripped of pretense, it was pure cruelty. He went on. "I made sure the nurse wrote her report early. I told the lawyer she's declining fast. They'll believe the papers, not her." I stopped the playback. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper, recognition. Proof had a sound, and now it was mine. The air felt heavier. Even the temperature seemed to shift. The room suddenly colder, as if the truth itself had drawn the heat away. I could feel it. The moment the world tilts back toward justice, slow but certain. I replayed the file, needing to hear it again. "They'll never trace it back," his voice said. "Everything's under her name, even the transfers. All I have to do is keep her quiet." He paused, then laughed again. "She's too proud to beg. She'll just fade out." That was when I stopped the recording a second time, my thumb pressing so hard into the button it left an imprint. The metallic taste of adrenaline filled my mouth. I whispered to the empty room, "Not this time." The house seemed to respond. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the hallway clock, all those quiet sounds I'd grown used to, merged into something steady, grounding. The truth didn't erase pain, but it gave it shape. When morning came, I didn't wait. I called my ally, the gatekeeper who'd once helped me file the original reports. "I found something," I said. "What kind of something?" His voice, on record. There was a long silence on the line, then a breath. "That's your proof. Make a copy. Keep one hidden." "I already have," I said. "But it's not enough to hide it. It has to be heard." She hesitated. "That's dangerous." So is silence. The quiet between us stretched, heavy but understanding. Finally, she said, "If you send it, make sure it goes public fast. Once it's out, they can't bury it." I looked down at the recorder again, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. The device was small enough to fit in my palm, yet it carried the weight of everything he'd built on lies. I transferred the file to my laptop, naming it carefully. One word, neutral enough to avoid suspicion. The progress bar crawled slowly, each second measured. When it hit 100%, I felt something inside me unlock. Listening again, I noticed something I'd missed the first time. Faint static near the end, then another voice, his friend's, low and cautious. "You sure this won't come back to you?" "It won't," he said. "She doesn't even know where I keep the recorder." My breath caught. The irony burned. The clock struck 11. The light outside my window began to dim, shadows folding across the floor. I placed the recorder back in the drawer, right where I'd found it. Let it rest there as a monument to his arrogance. Then I opened my email, attached the file, typed a single sentence. "You wanted silence. Here's the sound of it breaking." The cursor blinked, waiting. My hand hovered over the send button. I thought of every night I'd sat in that same room, wondering if the truth would ever find its way out. And now, it was about to move faster than fear. I hit send. The hum of the computer rose slightly as the message left my screen. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, faint and sharp, carrying the night's first cool breath through the open window. I watched the blinking light on the recorder one last time, steady and unwavering. Proof had lived in the dark long enough. I sent the file to the press. The newsroom called him before I could. I heard the anchor's voice through the television before I even touched the remote. Calm, practiced, devastatingly precise. Tonight, we bring you a recording that raises questions about trust, inheritance, and manipulation within a well-known family. My breath caught. They were playing it. The recording. His voice. The same voice that once said, "He'd take care of me," was now echoing through every home in town. He had laughed in that recording, bold and certain. "She'll sign anything," he'd said. "Gratitude makes people compliant." The clip replayed twice before cutting to the commentator's summary. "Authorities have confirmed the authenticity of the file," the anchor continued. "The Sun denies wrongdoing, calling it an invasion of privacy. But the content, verified by digital specialists, tells another story." Outside, I could hear the street noise swelling, cars slowing, doors shutting, murmurs of neighbors gathering under porch lights. The world was listening, and for once, I didn't have to speak. Truth had found its own voice. The phone started ringing. The first call came from the witness who'd helped me send the file. Her tone was a mixture of relief and worry. "It's everywhere," she said. "Even the late bulletin picked it up. You did it." "I didn't mean for it to spread like this," I whispered. "I just wanted them to listen." "Well, they're listening now," she replied. "But be careful. Exposure cuts both ways." I looked toward the window. Light spilled through the blinds in sharp, broken lines, like justice learning to walk. The world outside no longer felt separate. It had entered my room, filling every shadow that had once hidden me. On the television, a legal analyst was speaking. "If verified," he said, "this could redefine the case. The pattern of coercion is clear, and public opinion is shifting fast." I turned the volume down, unable to bear hearing his name paired with mine anymore. The weight of it had become something I no longer recognized. Moments later, another call. The station itself this time. A journalist's voice, formal but curious. "We'd like a statement," she said. "You're the subject of the clip, correct?" "I am." "Do you stand by your decision to release it?" I hesitated, the question pressing into me like a blade. "I didn't release it for revenge," I said slowly. "I released it so truth wouldn't keep dying in private." She paused. "That's quite a line." "It's not a line," I said. "It's what living through silence feels like." After she hung up, I stared at the letter still lying on my desk, the last one he'd written before the court hearings began. His handwriting had always been neat, deliberate. Even his cruelty was tidy. The words were short. "You're forcing my hand. Don't make me defend myself." Now his defense had already begun without him. The light outside dimmed to a softer tone, the evening shifting toward gold. I could hear the faint buzz of a camera van outside, the low rumble of reporters waiting. My ally had warned me this would happen. Once it goes public, they'll come for you too. But I wasn't hiding anymore. The truth had already left the house. carried through wires and airwaves, unstoppable. I stood at the window, the glow of the setting sun slicing through the blinds. Each beam cut across my face, warm against my skin, cool in meaning. I had lived half my life in his shadow. Now, for the first time, the light was mine. A knock echoed at the door. 3 short, firm raps. My stomach tightened. Through the glass, I saw the outline of suits. 2 men, 1 woman, papers in hand. Another knock, louder this time. I didn't move immediately. The air felt charged, like a storm about to break. My pulse counted the seconds. 1, 2, steady as the ticking clock on the mantel. When I finally stepped forward, I caught my reflection in the window pane. Older, yes, but unbroken. The kind of woman who'd stopped waiting for permission to tell her story. From outside came a voice, crisp and official. "We're here on behalf of your son. Please open the door." I closed my eyes for one long breath. The echo of his broadcasted laughter still hung in the air, mocking, dissolving. I turned the lock slowly, the metal clicking like punctuation at the end of a long confession. He arrived with lawyers at my door. He didn't recognize his own words played back. The courtroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the microphone and the soft rustle of papers. I could hear every breath, every shifting seat, as his voice filled the air. My son's voice, confident, rehearsed, now weapon-turned mirror. The audio played from the transcript recording, his laughter sharp, his tone smooth. "She'll do what I say. She always has." No one spoke. The sound carried across the chamber like a slow burn. Even the judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench, eyes narrowing. I watched him, my son, lower his head, fingers twisting the edge of his sleeve. He looked smaller than I remembered, not by age but by truth. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, "this recording corroborates the previous digital proof, as well as the written notice submitted under reference entry 2319B. He held up the document. The seal gleamed under the ceiling lights, bright, sterile, merciless. The clerk read aloud a portion of it, each word deliberate. "Restraint order request. Denied on procedural delay." That denial had almost buried me once. Now it stood resurrected as evidence. 3 voices rose from the gallery, unplanned, breaking the tension like thunder through glass. "Shame," someone whispered. Then again, louder. "Shame." The judge banged the gavel once. "Order in the court." But even she couldn't silence the weight of the moment. The microphone picked up the smallest tremor in my breath. I could hear it echo through the speakers, my pulse amplified, my restraint tested. I leaned forward, voice steady. I warned every institution that this was happening. They told me to calm down, to rest, to trust him. Now you hear what I heard in silence. My ally, the arbiter, nodded subtly from her seat beside the press table. Her hand hovered over her notes, ready to counter every objection. "The proof stands," she said firmly. "All prior denials were built on manipulation, not merit." The judge glanced at the defense table. "Mr. Collins," she said, her tone neutral but cold, "do you deny the authenticity of this recording?" He looked up for the first time. "It was taken out of context," he said, his voice barely audible. The prosecutor turned toward him. "Context? You describe falsifying your mother's medical reports. You admit to coercing signatures. What context redeems that?" Silence again. The kind that stretches until the air itself starts to bend. I could see the microphone's green light flicker. For a moment, it reflected against the polished wood of the witness stand, a thin beam like a pulse of truth. My voice followed it. "He wanted control, not care. You heard it yourselves. That's not context. It's confession." He shifted, his jaw tightening. "You made me this way," he muttered. "All those years you made me feel small." My throat caught, but I didn't look away. "I made you strong enough to tell the truth," I said softly. "You chose not to." The audience stirred. The sound of pens scratching filled the air. Journalists noting every word, cameras capturing every tremor. The institution that once dismissed my letters now documented my vindication line by line. The judge spoke again. The recording will be entered into the record as institutional proof. The petition under reference entry 2319B is reopened for review. My ally glanced at me, her eyes steady. "We're close," she whispered. "Don't let him rewrite it again." I exhaled slowly. The pressure I'd carried for months seemed to lift, molecule by molecule, until only the ache of memory remained. He looked at me one last time, something flickering behind his eyes. Not remorse, not yet, but recognition, the kind that comes too late. The judge raised her hand, signaling to the clerk. "The court acknowledges the presented evidence as verified." Her gavel struck once, the sound echoing through the chamber. Final. Absolute. Then she paused. The room held its breath. "In light of the presented proof," she said, "this court orders restitution." The words hung in the air, sharp and clear, cutting through years of silence like daylight through a locked door. The judge paused, then ordered restitution. Justice always arrives in ink. The judge's pen moved slowly, its tip carving history into the thick parchment of the court's judgment file. Each stroke felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. I stood still, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and release. The courtroom had emptied of sound except for that faint scratching of the pen, a sound I will remember longer than any gavel. When she finally stopped, she lifted the document toward the clerk. "Restitution approved," she said. "Property rights restored. Payment to be made in installments of $20,000, effective immediately." The clerk repeated her words for the record, and the gavel struck once, sealing the verdict. For a moment, I didn't move. The seal gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light, raised, embossed, warm from the judge's touch. When the clerk handed me my copy, I felt its weight in my hands, heavier than I expected, heavier than the years that had brought me to this point. The surface of the page was rough where the seal had been pressed, ridged like a scar made by justice itself. I traced it with my thumb, the texture grounding me in something real. No lies, no gaslighting, no lost in transfer, just truth, written and witnessed. He sat a few rows behind, silent, his eyes fixed somewhere on the floor. I didn't look at him long. Justice doesn't need his gaze to stand. The sound of the pen signing his consequence was enough. The arbiter, my ally through the entire ordeal, leaned toward me. "It's done," she said quietly. The system finally listened. I nodded. My voice came out softer than I intended. It only took 2 years, 6 hearings, and 1 recording. "Still," she said, "you made it here." Her words lingered. Here used to mean survival. Now it meant something else. Reclamation. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon air carried the faint hum of traffic and the distant sound of church bells. I stepped into the sunlight, the paper still clutched in my hand. Light spilled across the steps, warm and sharp, like the world had been waiting for me to notice it again. The press was already there, microphones raised, lenses aimed. I had been warned this might happen. One reporter shouted a question, "Do you forgive him?" But I kept walking. Forgiveness was never the point. Accountability was. I paused near the edge of the steps, the marble still cool beneath my shoes. My reflection wavered in the glass doors, older, steadier, unshaken. The same woman who had been told to let it go, who'd been written off as unstable, was now standing with the law on her side. The arbiter joined me, offering a brief smile. "You'll have to sign a final acknowledgement for the restitution." "Of course," I said, taking the pen. It was the same style the judge had used, smooth barrel, black ink, unassuming. But in my hand, it felt like more than an instrument. It was closure made tangible. I signed my name slowly, carefully, each letter deliberate. As the ink dried, the smell of it, sharp, metallic, filled the air. That scent anchored me in the present, a sensory echo of every form I'd been forced to sign before. Only this time, It was my signature that held power. He walked past as I handed the paperback, flanked by his lawyers. He didn't speak, but his expression carried something new: recognition, maybe even regret. For the first time, he didn't look invincible. "You lost nothing that wasn't stolen," my ally murmured beside me. I exhaled. The city noise seemed to fade for a moment, leaving only the beating of my own heart and the faint rustle of the judgment copy in my hands. Freedom isn't weightless. It presses down in its own way, quietly, steadily, reminding you what it cost to earn it. I glanced back once at the courthouse doors. The seal above them caught the light, the emblem shimmering briefly before the shadow swallowed it again. The same sunlight fell across my copy of the ruling, gilding the embossed mark like a brand of truth. Freedom felt heavier than the lock ever did. His chair stayed pulled out, apology unfinished. The sun slipped through the window and landed on the table, catching the edge of a folded sheet of paper. The air inside the house felt different, less watchful, more awake. For the first time in months, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace waiting to be noticed. The note was written in his hand. Faint, uneven lines. A half-started sentence. "I didn't mean for it to go." And then nothing. No closure, no name. Just a dash, the ink trailing off where truth must have pressed too hard. The light shifted, settling on the empty chair across from me. He had always sat there, tapping his fingers, controlling the rhythm of every meal, every conversation. Now, only stillness. The wood creaked faintly, as if remembering his weight but not missing it. I traced the edge of the note with my finger. The texture of the paper was rough, the kind you buy in bulk for bills and ledgers, not for confessions. Even his apology was administrative, half-hearted. And yet, something in that broken sentence softened me. It wasn't forgiveness, just recognition that he tried, in his own small, frightened way. Outside, the neighborhood sounded alive again. Children playing, someone mowing the lawn, a radio humming faintly through an open window. Life hadn't waited for me. It had just paused long enough for the storm to pass. I looked around the room, the clock on the wall still ticking, the curtains drawn halfway, dust floating through the sunlight like tiny ghosts of everything that once was. This was the same house where betrayal had been whispered in hallways and written into documents. And yet somehow it stood clean now, free from his shadow. The mirror across the room caught my reflection. Months ago, that same glass had shown me a woman unrecognizable, her eyes dimmed by disbelief and exhaustion. Now, it showed something steadier. Not younger, not lighter, but awake. "Justice doesn't heal," I whispered. "It only stops the bleeding." A quiet laugh escaped me, small but real. Maybe healing didn't come from verdicts or restitution, orders, but from learning how to live with what was left behind. I gathered the note and folded it carefully. The paper crackled, the sound sharp in the soft air. Beside it, his old glasses still rested on the edge of the table. I hadn't noticed them until now. The lenses were clean, though he hadn't been here to wear them. Someone, maybe me, maybe habit, had kept them that way. I picked them up, hesitated, then placed them on the folded note. "You saw everything through these," I said quietly. "Maybe now you'll see what I saw too." The sunlight reached further across the floor, stretching toward the chair like an afterthought of forgiveness. The warmth touched my wrist, faint but steady, a reminder that even light finds its way back to forgotten rooms. From outside came the sound of the gate closing. My ally, the one who had stood by me through hearings and headlines, had dropped by earlier, leaving a simple message on the porch. "You're free now. Don't forget to live like it. Free." The word still felt foreign, heavy with its own consequence. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The world looked ordinary, cars passing, trees swaying, but in that ordinariness was something sacred. No cameras, no judges, just morning light returning to its routine. On the table behind me, the chair stayed empty, pulled slightly back, as if waiting. But it wasn't for him anymore. It was for memory, to sit quietly and fade without bitterness. I took the note in my hand again, the unfinished words staring back at me. There was no need to complete them. Some sentences are meant to end in silence. I carried it upstairs, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my feet. The bedroom door was open, the bed neatly made, the same way it had been before everything unraveled. The air smelled faintly of paper and lavender soap, a scent that hadn't left since the day he did. I placed the folded note on his pillow. The sunlight from the window brushed over it, a small golden square of closure. I left the note on his pillow. I buried the old key beside the roses. The soil was softer than I remembered, the kind that crumbles easily between your fingers when it's ready to start again. Morning light spilled across the garden, gentle and forgiving. The air carried that faint scent of roses, the same kind he once said reminded him of my mother. Now, it reminded me only of survival. I pressed the key into the earth, slow and steady, feeling the cool metal slip beneath the surface. It wasn't just a key, it was a story that had locked too many years of silence, one door after another, until even my own voice sounded like an intruder. The neighbor watched from across the fence, holding a cup of coffee. She didn't speak until I stood up and brushed the dirt from my hands. "Starting over?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "No, just finishing properly this time." The sun caught the curve of the small metal key, a glint before it disappeared under soil. I covered it completely, my palms pressing down like a quiet benediction. Somewhere deep in that patch of earth, forgiveness was taking root, not as permission, but as freedom. The roses had grown wild since the hearings, their vines reaching for everything I had once tried to control. I trimmed them now, careful and precise, cutting only what was necessary. Each snip felt like a promise. "Do you want me to take a picture?" the neighbor asked after a while. "The paper's been covering your case. They'd love to show this. The garden, the closure." I hesitated, then nodded. "Just the roses, not me." She raised her phone anyway. "You should be in it," she said softly. "People need to see peace as possible." I turned slightly toward the sunlight, not posing, just standing. The shutter clicked. The scent of the roses deepened in the air, rich and full, anchoring me to the moment. For once, I didn't flinch at being seen. Later, she showed me the photo. A woman standing near a rosebush, gloves dirt-streaked, face calm but unguarded. Behind me, the old fence leaned slightly, the same place where I'd once hidden my fears in silence. Now, that image looked almost symbolic, a place of control turned into ground for growth. "They'll probably use it for the community column," she said. "Something like, 'Local woman rebuilds her life.'" I laughed quietly. Let them. It's better than "victim speaks out." She smiled, understanding more than she said. I sat on the low stone border and watched the petals shift in the breeze. The garden wasn't perfect, patches of dry soil, uneven rows, but it was alive, and that was enough. Each bloom felt like a small act of defiance against everything that had tried to bury me. My ally from the hearings, the arbiter, had sent me a message that morning. "Case officially closed. File reference 715F. Rest easy now." The words still sat unread in my inbox, but I didn't need to open them. The closure had already happened here, in dirt and daylight, not in paper and signatures. A faint hum filled the air, the sound of bees moving between blossoms, wings soft but relentless. Their rhythm reminded me that life doesn't pause for our pain, it just waits quietly for us to return. I thought of him, somewhere far from here, maybe holding the memory of that empty chair or the note I'd left behind. I hoped he found something resembling peace too. Not reconciliation, just a place where guilt could finally rest. The neighbor called out again, "They came out beautiful this year." I nodded. "They had to," I said. "They've been through worse." Her laughter carried over the hedge, light and unburdened. I stood brushing dirt from my palms and looked around, the window light catching the garden gate, the faint outline of where the old lock used to hang. The key now slept beneath the roses, and for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to dig anything up again. The wind shifted, bringing the rose scent closer, warm and familiar. It wrapped around me like a memory rewritten. I whispered to the air, not as a vow, but as truth. It's over, and it's enough. The garden hummed with second chances. I wrote him a letter I'll never send. The paper waited, folded open like forgiveness itself, empty and quiet. The pen trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from the weight of everything unsaid. I'd written so many statements for the world, affidavits, testimonies, reports, but this was different. This one wasn't for the record. It was for the release. The candle on the desk flickered, throwing long, uneven shadows across the wall. The air smelled faintly of wax and smoke, soft, familiar, almost human. That scent anchored me. It reminded me that peace doesn't arrive with applause. It sneaks in quietly when the noise finally dies down. I began slowly. "You taught me how to endure," I wrote, "but endurance isn't love, and silence isn't loyalty." Each word was deliberate, drawn from a place between ache and clarity. The ink bled slightly into the paper's fibers, a small imperfection that made it more alive. I wrote about the nights he'd turned distance into a weapon, about the way apology came only after damage had already settled. I didn't write for revenge. I wrote to hand the truth back to time, where it belonged. Halfway through, I stopped and looked around the room. The clock on the wall ticked softly. A sound that once made me anxious now felt like rhythm, steady and kind. Outside, faint city lights shimmered through the curtains. Somewhere, people were still chasing things they'd later regret losing. The candle bent lower, its flame bowing as if listening. I whispered to it, "I'm not writing to change him. I'm writing to remember me." That sentence stayed in the air, warm and whole. For years I had waited for acknowledgement, for some grand apology or justification. But the truth is, closure doesn't arrive in someone else's handwriting. It comes when you stop needing them to read it. I folded the first page, then another, until it felt like a secret between the past and the present. My hand brushed against the journal lying beside me, pages filled with fragments of testimony, scribbled numbers, bits of court language that once defined my existence. I turned past them to a blank page and began again. This time, the letter wasn't to him. It was to the woman who had survived it all. "You were never weak," I wrote. "You were tired, and still, you kept standing." Tears came quietly, not heavy, not desperate, just gentle acknowledgments of how far I had walked to get here. They dotted the paper, tiny translucent marks that caught the candlelight like glass. Thought of my ally, the one who had pushed me through the final filings and hearings. She once told me, "Peace isn't forgetting, it's remembering without trembling." I finally understood what she meant. Memory doesn't vanish, it transforms. The candle's flame wavered once more, nearly going out, then righted itself. I smiled at the stubbornness of it. "You and I both," I whispered. By the time I signed my name, the wax had melted low. I blew it out, the smoke curling upward, twisting like a spirit leaving something it had guarded long enough. In the sudden darkness, the afterglow lingered, a faint halo of orange at the wick's tip. I tucked the letter into an old envelope. No address, no stamp, just my handwriting, steady for the first time in years. I placed it inside the drawer with the rest of the documents, not to keep it hidden, but to remind myself that some truths don't need witnesses. Outside, the first traces of dawn began to show. The sky carried that thin shade of blue that only appears when night finally gives up. I opened the window, letting the cool air move through the room. Freedom didn't roar. It sighed. The past no longer held me. It simply existed, like a story told, understood, and released. I closed the drawer gently, not as an ending, but as a promise to the self I'd reclaimed. Tomorrow waits with an unlocked door. The same room once caged me. Now it's open to the sky. The ceiling that used to press down like a sentence was gone, replaced by air, by sunlight that moved freely across the walls. The wind carried the scent of fresh paint and something cleaner. Freedom, maybe. I stood where fear had once kept its shape, and for a moment I could still hear the echo of my own voice from those days when I whispered to survive. The mirror was still there, cracked at the corner, but standing. I walked closer, fingertips grazing the frame. It had reflected every version of me, broken, furious, pleading. Now it caught light instead of darkness. For the first time, it didn't show what I'd endured. It showed what I'd become. "I never thought I'd see this day," my ally said from behind me. Her voice trembled slightly, softer than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't either," I replied, "but maybe the room did." We both laughed quietly. It wasn't joy exactly, it was release. I moved toward the window. The glass had been replaced. No bars, no curtains drawn shut. Outside, the garden stretched wide and untamed, sunlight pooling across the roses I'd planted weeks earlier. Their color had deepened since then, stronger, as if they too had found a reason to bloom. The walls once recorded silence like evidence. Now they breathed again. I could almost feel it, the pulse of something alive where memory had once frozen time. A faint beam of sunlight crossed my hand. It was the same angle that used to fall on the lock years ago, the lock he kept, polished, the lock that symbolized control. I remembered how those same hands that once fed him had been forced to beg for a key. I whispered into the quiet. He locked me in with the same hands I once fed. The words felt like an echo from another lifetime. Then, almost without meaning to, I said aloud, "I opened the world with the same hands that once trembled." The beam brightened, as if the room itself had heard me, and agreed. My reflection shifted in the mirror, no longer trapped within its frame, just part of the light spilling outward. Downstairs, I could hear faint laughter from the neighborhood. The community center I'd helped rebuild was hosting a gathering, something small but honest. Children's voices rose through the open window, pure and certain. I turned back once more to the space behind me, the corner where I'd once curled up, where silence used to sound heavier than screams. Now there was only air, sunlight, and a faint hum from outside. Life had taken its rightful place. The ally beside me rested a hand on the wall. "You're sure you want to keep this room open like this?" "Yes," I said. "It's proof, not of what happened, but that it ended." The mirror caught the afternoon sun again, scattering it across the floor. Each shard of light looked like a promise. "You know," she murmured, "you could close it up, make it something new." I smiled. "It already is." The wind stirred through the open window, lifting the thin curtain like a slow breath. For a second the light reflected off the glass and filled the whole space, blinding and beautiful. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. No more doors, no more locks, only light, returning to the place it had once been denied. Down in the garden, the gate creaked open. Someone arriving, perhaps a visitor, or maybe just life stepping back in where it belonged. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. The sound alone was enough. The air in the room shimmered faintly, warmth brushing against my skin like forgiveness itself. Light never forgets where it was once denied.